Good evening, everyone. Evening, Martin. Evening, Pete. This is a Loaded Mag special with George.
Well, do you know what it is? Before we get started, sometimes you don't realize what you're watching, but that intro, and I know I'm sat here advertising and I've got my big Loaded Mag hat on and everything else. That's one of the best intros out there on YouTube for NUFC content by far. Paul,
my head like knocks along every single time when it's going on. It's got
sometimes you're not really watching it because you're thinking about what we're going to talk about and what we're going to do. But like when you're sitting back, because Richie's on the buttons tonight, you kind of get back into it. But it's a great intro. It really is. We did, Richie. In fairness, you did really well with that. Obviously, we had to go long ways when Daz upset the last person that was doing our intros. But anyway, so that's a story for a whole nother. That's a whole nother show. Yeah, exactly. Well, it is Thursday night, Loaded Mag. We are having a special. There's Chris Hall, the Avon lady. He's out there. He's at another conference. He's in Rotterdam tonight, smoking weed and dishing out perfume. So he's doing whatever he's doing. But yeah, we those of us that joined us on Tuesday night, we had Ben Jacobs on. We thought it was a really, really good show. We've had some great feedback. Views have been really good. And if you do enjoy the stuff we do, look, hit the like button, share it out, and subscribe if you would. We'd really love that. And kind of last time we had Ben on, and there was a bit of stuff going on, obviously with Newcastle United. Obviously, we've since had arbitration pushback. We've had the news with Cat. Everybody seems on a bit of doom and gloom. We've got no players signed. I've just watched Twitter again there for the last half hour having me dinner. Villa have put in an option to try and get Axel Zwenby on loan. Everybody's going, oh, well, that's that done now and this, that. It's a lot of doom and gloom. We had Ben, did that last time, and kind of in between all that, we picked up a really, really good thread off Twitter from Geordie2302 George, and we brought him on the show, and he went down a treat. So we said the right thing to do, because he tweeted yesterday. I dropped him a DM and said, "Do you want to come back on?" He went, "Thank God," because I was going to put out another massive thread. So you've probably saved me about 5 hours of typing. So yeah, look, without further ado, here is George. Welcome back, buddy.
George.
Evening, fellas. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, mate. Thanks very much for coming on at short notice. It was good to see that you and me alike both got clearance from the missus to be able to play out for an hour again tonight. But yeah, look, welcome. Obviously, lots gone on since we had you on last time. Arbitration, obviously, delayed till 2022. Then we got the news earlier in the week with the Cat piece. Lots, obviously, nothing really happening with NUFC. We're back to pre-season, which hasn't been great. Obviously, we've had our roving reporter for Loaded Mag at the games. But other than that, we're back to Brucey, who apparently is bashing away. We're not quite sure what at. Certainly not transfers at the minute, because we're the only club that hasn't signed a soul. But look, let's go back through the events, from your perspective, and we'll kind of interject. Richie's on the button, so he'll throw up any comments. If you've got any comments for George or any questions, get them up there, get them in now, and we'll try and get to as many as we can. But George, take us through events and where you think everything is at.
All right. So I think it's that old adage, isn't it? Being a Newcastle fans, like being on a roller coaster, and you get the highs with that and you get the lows, and we seem to be going through a little bit of a low point at the moment. But I think what I would say is, listening to your show earlier in the week with Ben, there was a lot of positives to be taken out of that. So I know Twitter and people in general think Ben has got some kind of agenda. I felt it myself in terms of some things, but I think with this takeover, which is, you can't say is anything but a saga, the amount of time that it's gone on for, perspective changes throughout time. So as new information comes to light, you have to make different decisions and sort of refocus on what you think. And I know a lot of it is supposition, a lot of it is guesswork, a lot of it is trying to understand what the process is. I mean, only the other day, I didn't think there could potentially be an appeal against the CAT decision. There can be, and I've done a fair bit of research into that, but I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But for me, I think it's not as negative as everybody fears at this stage. And the first thing is arbitration's been pushed back till early next year, and until arbitration is pulled completely, as far as I'm concerned, PIF are at the table. I think if arbitration gets pulled, that's when we know, because Ben, and he reinforced this point several times, he's got contacts out there in the region. He said he used to go to the golf with guy's name I still can't pronounce, and I'm not even going to try.
Alrumian.
Yeah. Well said, you.
That's about as much Saudi as I know. Don't quote me.
And I think he reinforced the fact that they've just created, and well, by lack of media narrative, they're there protected, and they're protecting their brand, and they're not involved in any of the legal battles, and they refuse to sort of back up the statement which Amanda and the Rubens and the club apparently wanted. And when you think about it, that's just completely logical. So if you're a multi-billion wealth fund, you don't want to get into that. I mean, there's already potential pitfalls with this takeover, and as we know, if they were to be tested, the sort of line is that they would walk away because of the piracy issue. And I think that's another one which was kind of skirted around the other day. We know it's not an issue in terms of the separation issue, but in the wider context of Saudi Arabia, piracy in the Premier League, and not wanting to sell to an organisation who has been involved with piracy. It's all part of that massive jigsaw puzzle, isn't it, in terms of all of the things which have led us to where we are. So I think that's the first point in terms of arbitration being pushed back, unless it's pulled, unless that is withdrawn. And I must admit, I haven't. So not only have you saved there's time in terms of writing something, you've saved us huge amounts of time in research, because I would have been poring over the words in the Premier League handbook to work out when and if and how you pull arbitration. And then there's a question, would we even be notified? Because I think that's one of the key things, and that's part of the sort of transparency agenda of the NUFC protest. And I'm going to segue in for a little plug there, because I think the guys at NUFC protest now made an appeal for any fan who's written a letter to the Premier League, not had a response, timelines, anything. If you haven't already sent it in and you have sent something, please do send it in. We've got a couple of little things ticking away in the background that might take a couple of weeks to bear some fruit, but we think they will bear some fruit. Okay. And we think we'll definitely get some kind of response, a response more than no comment, which is all that's been elicited so far. So in terms of arbitration, the process where we are, I think it's not horrific. Then we've obviously got the jurisdiction hearing on the 27th of September. And if I'm being perfectly honest, I think it's going to go quiet from now until after that point. So I don't think there's going to be much. I think realistically, the club have got to focus on transfers and motivating a squad that, well, to me, didn't necessarily look motivated when we saw them play on YouTube the other week. I didn't see the Rotherham game. To be honest, I was a little bit apathetic with it because I had some work to catch up on. And pre-season to me is always one of those. You can't really get a sense because it's about fitness, isn't it? You try new tactics. I'm never hugely concerned pre-season. I mean, yeah, if we got drubbed 7-0, I might have felt a little bit more down. But these are teams who are all professional football, and at the end of the day, it's 11 against 11. So I think that's where the club needs to focus. I think the CAT jurisdiction hearing is interesting because when you sort of get into the rules of proceedings and the actual tribunal rules themselves, the documents are huge and they take you on a massive little journey. So every process has a paragraph, and that paragraph points you to 3 other paragraphs, and you go around on a little journey and you have to highlight things and sort of follow it around. So from as I understand it, and it is as I understand it, I'm not saying this is definite or indeed fact, but as I understand it, we've already been through 2 tranches of evidence where the Premier League have had to supply evidence to demonstrate why they believe that the CAT has no jurisdiction. The club have responded to that, and the Premier League responded again, and that is sort of borne out in the reasoned orders in terms of the latest extension. So that's why I think that's happened. That's also backed up by in terms of the skeleton arguments that are expected to be provided in hearings, and then there's a whole section on oral hearings. And I did make a little note. So there is a particular. So for anybody who's interested in the CAT principles, the rules published in 2015, paragraph 4, section 5E, in terms of planning hearings, they structure it in advance in order to avoid any unnecessary or oral evidence arguments. So that means, or the way I interpret that is, they provide a lot of evidence, both in the Premier League in terms of why they haven't got jurisdiction, and Newcastle as to why they have, and the Premier League have then gone back again. And in theory, the CAT could have made a determination based on that evidence. There is provision to sort of say, if we are going to have oral hearings, then it should be pretty quick, and we should be able to make a determination straight away. And as I said earlier, that can be appealed. However, there's a couple of caveats to that. So if, let's say, for example, the Premier League win and it's determined CAT haven't got jurisdiction, I wish I was having cans every night, to be fair. If the Premier League win, we don't have jurisdiction. The club could appeal, but the club have to get permission from the tribunal and/or the Court of Appeal, and they have to have legal standing grounds to do it. So it's not just because they don't like the decision. It's not just because they forgot a piece of evidence. It's got to have some legal ground and legal standing. So that suggests that they've had to do the bulk of the work up front before that date. That's as I understand the process. I
think with the CAT thing, sorry, George, some of the stuff that I've read is that, in particular with a CAT case, and again, you may know more than me, is the judges seem to on this jurisdiction thing, they seem that, certainly from what I've read, the judges seem to err on the side of caution, and not many of these get thrown out. They tend to let them run from what I've read and what I've seen, because of, I suppose, the legality of it, in that it is in a different court, as opposed to the arbitration. So would that be fair to say that there's more chance of it running than not, even if the Premier League challenged it?
So I think so, yeah. So I'm not going to be like Ben. I'm not going to sit on the fence. I've got skin in the game. I'm a Newcastle fan. It's that positivity element as well. So I'm probably biased, but from what I've read, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's more chance of it running than not. That's not to say the Premier League couldn't have pulled the blinder. And to be honest, listening to Ben and sort of thinking about things and that material separation argument, I think ultimately that's going to be the Premier League's key argument, because we all know the Premier League is a membership organisation, and each of the 20 clubs is a member, and they sort of they make up the organisation as a whole. The Premier League effectively regulated. I think it was one of the earlier tweets I'd gone through the Premier League's accounts, and it tells you what their main duties are, and that's to manage the league, make sure all the games get played, fixture list, which as a Newcastle fan probably fucks you right off anyway, getting sent away every Monday night or Friday night, the arse end of the world. Yeah. But then the second point is that they exploit TV revenue, and that in itself is an interesting word for going into a competition case where you use a word like exploit, and that's written in their accounts. But that's just me probably being a little bit pedantic, a little bit overzealous in terms of picking things out. I think the main argument that the Premier League will make is that there's no jurisdiction, because the Premier League handbook, which is effectively contract, so all of those clubs sign up to it and they have to abide by all of the rules which are in that Premier League handbook. It's that contract, if you like, says that arbitration is mandated. That is how you resolve issues. Now, from what I understand, this is legacy. So this comes back from FIFA, UEFA determinations, where deals were done in smoke-filled rooms by people who have subsequently been charged with corruption, people who have subsequently been banned from the game, and there's clear rationalisation why they don't want to get rid of that. But I think what we're seeing now, certainly with the Manchester City judgment that was released, there is more and more of this type of stuff coming into the public domain. And I mean, Nick DeMarco tweeted it. We did see that the precedent was set in that argument from us trying to get the chair removed. So I think, again, public interest isn't going to go away, and public interest in this type of thing is critical, because it's not just the 52,000 fans in the ground. It's not just the 6-7 million people in the region. It's the whole Premier League, and it's everybody who's got a vested interest in it. Because at the end of the day, it could be one of their clubs, and then you've got the whole pyramid of football. Because what happens when Sunderland get back to the Premier League and they want to be taken over by a multi-billionaire who can take them to the next level? Are the Premier League going to stop that from happening? Because at the end of the day, you've got to remember, this is a commercial sale. It's a commercial sale of the club. And, well, I mean, look at the government's interim reviews in terms of a regulator and having an independent regulator. You don't have an independent regulator if things are operating effectively. It's not how you don't need it. If things are working appropriately, then why have regulation?
Oh, George hasn't paid doesn't put the 50 cent in the meter.
It makes absolutely no sense.
He's back.
I lost my thread having to keep up my brain as well there.
No, we've got a question there, and I know these other things will get you to fly up. So Yano put in a question, and I could maybe have listened to things wrong, although it looks like George is frozen again, or either that or he's very, very happy just to have a question.
But Mark, before you ask that question, and it will give a chance for George to get back on. With regards to, it's a great question that was asked earlier. Is it going to be seen? Is the cat case going to be seen? Is it going to get thrown out? That's the big question now with regards to September the 27th. Is it going to go ahead, or the Premier League going to sort of effectively get away with one and get it thrown out? For me, I'm like George. I don't see it being thrown out personally. And George has touched on one or two things, but the key to this is that Amanda Staveley mentioned this in some of her talk as well, and some of her sort of media appearances in the build up to the arbitration. In that, this is public interest right now. Not just with Newcastle and the Premier League and Newcastle fans in the Premier League. It is the whole of the Premier League in terms of the English game. Want some transparency with regards to what's going on at the elite level of football, and I think with the judges, the fact that it's a cat case and it's not done through arbitration in and around the Premier League, I think goes in our favour, which is why a lot of people have talked about for a good couple of months now, why saying the cat case is the way to go. It's the way to get that disclosure, and the disclosure is going to set things in motion. And I think there's a duty of care to the Premier League fans and fans of football in this country to see, actually, is there anything going on in English football that shouldn't be going on effectively? And that's what Amanda Staley's been ultimately sort of alluding to, is that there's stuff going on that actually needs to be exposed that there's something going through. So I do think that the cat case will be seen, and I think that will throw up a lot of different questions, and I think that will be the setback that the Premier League don't want at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Ben alluded to that, which was, the cat case itself isn't, necessarily the straightest or quickest path to getting the takeover. Arbitration is by far the quicker path to getting the takeover, because the only argument that was put forward at arbitration, from everybody's understanding, unless that's changed somewhere in the whole lot of it, is that it was that Newcastle United had to show that there were layers of separation between PIF and the Saudi state. So, Ben, and again, some people liked it, some people didn't like it, raised the question and the flag and went, if Newcastle United had the winning hand for arbitration and had the material proof to show the separation, why did arbitration get put back? Part of his comments were that the Premier League were asked to disclose certain pieces of information, and that Newcastle United as a club were asked to submit and disclose some more information. And both sides of that in arbitration, both the club and the Premier League, refused to disclose other information. But again, that's what's coming from, what others have heard, what Ben has heard, what the press has heard, what, certain papers have heard. The cat, I think, is important in trying to get that transparency. And obviously, if something comes from that does show that there has been anti-competitive moves, or there has been outside lobbying, or the other six have been involved, to your point, Pete, it opens up a massive monster that the Premier League may just go, bugger that, we don't want that all out, we'll settle, and listen, we now take your documentation, go back to arbitration, and CAT gets closed off. As Ben said, the Premier League asked Newcastle United never to talk about it ever again and sign whatever non-disclosures and everything else. And you go back to arbitration, separation is proven, and we get a takeover. That's where my head is at the minute. So I think Yano's comment there, George, is, if the arbitration is allowing the Premier League to argue the two cases are the same, leading to the delays in the CAT, why not pull the arbitration and just go forward with the CAT? My understanding is the argument that the Premier League are trying to put out and get the jurisdiction of the CAT pulled is that there is material overlap with the arbitration in what Newcastle are trying to argue against. That would be my understanding.
Yes, sorry about that. So me disappearing has allowed me to refocus, because my brain, as I say, me takes us down tangents and just on little bits of rant. So in terms of that, so you're absolutely right. I think arbitration is the quickest and easiest way to prove separation, and there's some core points on that, but which I'll come on to in a second. But in terms of the question, why not just forge ahead with the CAT? Well, if you get rid of arbitration, what is going to happen within the CAT? He's asked for, so there's a list of things that the club wanted for. So the CAT, what did Mike ask for? He asked for damages for loss of profit or opportunity. He asked for an injunction to withdraw the decision, to direct the decision. So that's the sort of part of the root of the problem. He asked for interest on that money. He asked for costs, i.e. the costs of the all of the legal fees that will be going on. And then he asked for further relief as the tribunal feel appropriate. So given that of the 5 things he asked for, 4 of them are financially related, it's not the real path to the takeover. But, and it's a big fucking deal, it gives much wider disclosure. I'm going to go back to the arbitration, though. So in terms of the arbitration, I think you're absolutely right. Quickest pathway to takeover, because the core issue is on separation. So coming to the disclosure point, in theory, you're asking for, and the point I made earlier about how your viewpoint changes as you learn things. So right back in March, when we got the whole information about Beloff trying to be removed as the chair, and we got the judgments which said the arbitration was going to take place in July, and blah blah blah. It felt like doom and gloom then as well. But then very quickly, people were like, oh, it's a bit of a masterstroke, because we're putting real sort of onus on transparency, and we're making it clear that there's going to be a judgment. So the precedent's been set that at some stage there will be a judgment, and that judgment will be published, and some various other bits. So we didn't win everything, but we didn't lose everything either. And I think it was a worthwhile process to get there, to demonstrate it. Now, thinking about it again now, and the argument of separation, and as Ben said, I mean, really, really clearly, it's not about demonstrating that MBS and the KSA are completely separate. It's about that levels of separation in terms of any company. So is there far enough removal demonstrated within the business plan and what have you to do it? And that was new when Ben said it, not this time around, the last time, and that was something that really, really interested me, because that was a whole new narrative. However, when he was talking about disclosure the other day, it's not just the club are limited to disclosure on separation. So why have you made your decision? Why have you determined that? And I suspect there's an element of privileged information there, which they don't necessarily have to disclose, because legally privileged information doesn't have to be disclosed. And then the club have kind of gone, oh, well, here's the legal stuff from KSA, and the Premier League have gone, well, what was PIF's involvement in BLQ? And we've gone, well, that's not relevant. And the Premier League have gone, well, that's what we want disclosed. So I think that's where the stalemate has arisen in terms of the disclosure. And we haven't gotten everything we want, they haven't got everything we want. But I think the club have been sort of not keen, but the reason they've sort of delayed it to bring the cat into play, going back to what I said a few weeks ago on the show in terms of the sequencing, I always felt the sequencing was out, because if you're going to look at disclosure from the cat, it had to be before arbitration. And that's a really important point, because the disclosure in the cat would be scoped up in the same way, but you've got to remember this is about anti-competitive behaviour, right? It's not about separation. So separation is quite a narrow scope. Anti-competitive behaviour, and what do we know as fans about the allegations of anti-competitive behaviour? Well, you've got the ESL, so there's an element of anti-competitive behaviour. You've got lobbying, because we know BN sent letters. We know that Amnesty International and other individuals sent letters that were responded to by the Premier League. So there's evidence that you've got Richard Keys on the TV saying X, Y, Z, but then you've also got process. So the Premier League, going back to what I said earlier about that Premier League handbook forming the contract, that contract which says that arbitration must be followed. If you're in arbitration and you have an issue with the process, but you can only talk about separation, how would you bring the process into it? Well, through disclosure from the cat. And that's where I think the real win is here, because that disclosure isn't just about the anti-competitive behaviour. It's about the process and how that process compares to other takeovers and other clubs, and all of those other issues that aren't just separation focused. So I think for me, that's why I wouldn't say I'm as confident as I was when I thought the arbitration hearing was going to be in July. I don't think any of us are. But I think I described it the other day on Twitter as being pivotal. And then I got the whole Newcastle takeover bingo imminent, blah, blah, blah. But I think it is. And I think it is because if, as you said, that cat gets the jurisdiction, I think we've got to expect an appeal. So I think we've got to expect that. And looking at the timeframes that are set out, they've got 3 weeks from the date of publication to lodge that appeal. Then there's another 3 or 4 weeks on top of that before some of the decisions required. So these aren't quick things to get to, but the tribunal do have the power just to strike some of this stuff down and say, actually, you've got no legal grounding. Go to the Court of Appeal by all amounts, but they'll turn it around and say no. And when we get to that stage, and then when we move on to the case management conference, that's when I think we might start to see movement and shift. You're still talking a while away. That's not in September. The hearing's in September. So you're talking October at the earliest. You're talking maybe mid-November. And if you think that the arbitration scheduled for early, we haven't been given a date. I would hope that through the whatever decision determination comes out on the as a result of the hearing on the 27th, we'd get an indication as to when that arbitration might be, in the same way that we did from the first decision, because that's a legal means to bring it into the public domain, unless of course both parties reach some kind of settlement before then. And I think that's a really interesting point, because now there's a bit more time, because let's face it, it was always going to be tight before the season started anyway, and I think it was unrealistic to expect it would be. If the hearing had gone through in July, we still got the owners and directors test. How long is it going to take for them to sort of get the players, manager, etc., all of those things in place? From a strategic point, I mean, it's not great for us as fans, but from a strategic point, from Amanda Staveley, the Rubens, and Piff, if you're going to come in, you want that 6 months prep time. I mean, that's what I would want. If I was a multi-billionaire and I was buying a football club because I wanted to make money out of it, I'd be looking at the short term. And obviously we've got problems in the short term because we're stagnating. But we've got a decent squad. It's not a bad squad. Manager, but I mean, all right, last season. Do you know what I mean? You can't knock. Well, you can, but you can't knock where we finished, and you don't just. The league's a marathon; it's not a sprint, isn't it? And I think we just need to have some perspective about it, because it's not like we're going to be pushing for top 6. We are going to be hovering around 17, mid-table mediocrity for the course of the season. I mean, it's not brilliant. It's not what we want as fans, but I dare say we'll see some brilliance from ASM. We'll see Wilson score a few goals. If we get Willock in, hopefully he'll score some. I mean, some youngsters are potentially going to get the opportunity to come through this season. We've got those types of things to look for, and I think that's what we've got to look at. Whereas strategically, for those who are going to invest in the club, they're going to want to look at infrastructure. They're going to want to look at getting rid of that shithole training facility. They're going to want to bring in sort of their own manager, and who's going to want to bring in their own players. I think I read, it might have been today, that I think we're the only one of only 2 clubs in the league who haven't got a sort of director of football. Yeah. So there's all of these types of things that if I was in Piff's shoes and understanding, I don't understand how they operate, because they are a £1 trillion wealth and very successful people and individuals. But based on what I've heard and what people have said, it makes complete sense for them to remain quiet on the issue and wait to have things develop. I think the one thing that we have to be cautious of as a fan base is, well, no, 2 things. An information vacuum, because nobody knows anything, is to be expected, and we can't just let people fill it with shit. And so stop listening to me, because I know nothing. But don't get caught up all the time. Papers have to sell papers; they need to get clicks. I think from a fan perspective, we can talk and speculate, because that's what we do. It's good to rant and vent, but I wouldn't necessarily put too much stock in X, Y, and Z until we see something which backs it up from an evidentiary perspective. And then the other thing that I think we need to be cautious of is Mike Ashley. The bloke's a known gambler. He's had us on puppet strings for years. I mean, the focus isn't on Mike at the minute. The focus is very much, as Ben said again, the narrative that the Premier League are the bad boys. The Premier League are the ones who who have stopped this. They're the ones who've delayed it. And I think the reality of the position is, from what we know now, that both parties have been involved in that. It's not just one side. And we can talk about strategy, we can talk about whatever, but we've got Mike in the middle of it. We've got to. So that point you made, Martin, earlier about the settlement and dropping the cat, there comes a point in time where that settlement could be big, and you think of interest on what he's got. So if he's talking about loss of opportunity, that means that there's no takeover. So he's covered all bases in that. It's not like he's not an astute businessman. So it's loss of profit, loss of opportunity. And you could look at loss of opportunity in two ways. Loss of the opportunity, loss of opportunity to reinvest that money. So if Mike, and again, if I was a billionaire, and there's a reason why I'm not a billionaire, but we're not going to that way.
Yes.
If I was a billionaire and I had £300 million of money that I couldn't access, but I could demonstrate that I had tripled my wealth through the pandemic, which Mike's done something akin to that, then surely that would be opportunity. That's opportunity lost because I didn't have that capital available. So I think as a fan base, we just need to be cautious about what Mike's saying. We need to be cautious about whatever information does come out and the media and sources that comes out. Because, I mean, if Piff do walk away, I would be massively fucked off if the Stavelys and Rubens and etc. didn't come out and say they've gone. We'll try and get more investors. But, I mean, given the level of involvement that they've had with the fan base, the comms that they've had so far, it's what you would expect from them. So I would hope that would be my plea to them. Don't just leave us in the dark if it all goes to shit. We're all big boys and big girls. We can take it because we know that Mike won't be here forever. We know he's just the sort of caretaker of the club. It's our club at the end of the day. We're the ones who are invested. We're the ones who are passionate. We're the ones who tell the club what we want and when we want it. So I think they're my words for caution. That's where I think things are. I'm not bubbling effervescent with positivity as previously, but I'm not sort of massively negative, and I don't think I will be until after September when we've got more information and time's moved on, and I think that time moved on sort of critical when you hear about the marching up the hill and down the hill in the disclosures that were made by DCMS in their emails. That's what this feels like. It feels like a deliberate ploy to extend things, to make things wait. But again, and it might be clutching straws. It might well be reason you want to damage your brand. But I think they're wholly reasonable arguments as well. You can't just ignore it unless you've got a counter argument which is sort of based in as much logic. So I think we're on a dip, aren't we? And I'm sure there'll be a climb, and we'll get some heady heights. We'll maybe even win our first game against West Ham and be top of the league. Who knows? And then the next week we'll be bottom. So I think that's where we are. I think that's where things stand. And I think you've probably heard enough from me just gathering now. Like,
yeah, no, you're right. Let's get him off.
I just wanted to say, you made a point about the PIF and their comms or their communication, and I think that's my biggest concern. And I think there's been a few on social media over the last, maybe the week, certainly the last few days, that have started to sort of ask the question with regards to PIF, and can they come forward and say that they still are actively looking to be part of this consortium? Are they actively still part of wanting to take over Newcastle United? Because the one thing that concerns me is the fact that they haven't come out and sort of nailed their sort of cards to their chest and say, we're still here. We've heard it from Amanda Staveley, but Amanda Staveley's PCP. She's not PIF. And you know, we haven't heard from the Rubens, but we're under the impression that they're still around. And that's my biggest concern, if I'm honest, is that the longer this goes on, the longer they will feel embarrassed and disrespected by how long this process is going on, and the quicker they might decide to jump ship. You know, there was some talk the other day that you know, the fact that the arbitration's been put to 2022 means that they're still actively involved. I don't see it that way. You know, they can pull out at any time, and we have to remember that they haven't come forward since they put their statement out back in September 2020. They haven't actually said anything with regards to this takeover, and that for me is a big concern. And I'm not trying to put a dampener on things, because things with Ben and yourself tonight, George, have been relatively positive, but I'm still failing to hear from PIF to say that they actively still want this deal. And you know, Amanda Staveley has headed up a lot of this stuff. In fact, all of it. You know, this effectively falls on her. They can walk away and grab another club within a second, and it wouldn't make any difference to them, because their vision 2030 will still run regardless of whether it's Newcastle or whether it's not. You know, Amanda Staveley has thrown so much support to the fans and the club and wanting this deal, and that's great. But if you haven't got your 80% backers, which is what PIF are, you know, remember, PCP and the Rubens are only, you know, 20%, 10% each. The PIF are the big dogs here, and they're the ones that we really need to hear from, because they're the ones that effectively are going to be owning this club if we get this takeover. So that's my biggest concern. So, you know, you talked about a fantastic strategy, and it could well be with the cat case and the arbitration and how it pans out over the next, you know, 6 to 8 months. But ultimately, that strategy means nothing if PIF are not here, and that for me is a huge concern. And I think some of the pessimism around the fan base over the last few days, certainly since Tuesday, is probably because of that. It is because it goes on a number of months. We're frustrated as a fan base because we thought we'd get clarity in the next sort of 4 to 6 weeks. We're not going to get that now. And, you know, the frustration is with PIF is that they've had over a year and a half of not having a club that they could have been owned for the last 20, 25 months, and they've not. Are they going to say, you know what, enough's enough? Because if we're honest as fans, PIF have waited a hell of a lot longer than any of us would have expected. You know, if you look at it now, PIF, we probably would have expected to have walked away a long time ago. And there's some journalists out there that, you know, openly and intentionally wind up fans on purpose have said the PIF have walked away and numerous times and they've not. But there has to be a cut-off point. You know, so that you know, I don't mean to sound negative, but that's a big concern for me.
I know George will have a view on this, but here's my take for what it's worth. I take a little bit of what Ben said on Tuesday night. PIF as an organisation don't talk until the deal is done, and I think from things I've read, and I've spent a bit of time over the last few weeks, and I've watched a lot of stuff about Saudi, about MBS, about PIF in particular, about how they did their deals with Disney, how they'd done the deal with the F1 with McLaren and different bits and pieces. And I think the important thing on all of those is you never heard anything. You never heard the deal was being done. You never heard PIF were buying a chunk of Twitter. You never heard that they were doing whatever with Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. Only, and I believe personally, only if and when the deal is done will you see PIF, Saudi Arabia, making noise and, you know, kind of coming out about, you know, because I genuinely believe some of the stuff that, you know, others have said, which is, I think the reason they could go and they could buy AC Milan, it's been talked about, was talked about investing with the Sun Corporation to put money into Inter Milan. they could go and buy any club they wanted to. The problem is they want to be into the Premier League. That's the league where the money is. That's one of the best leagues in the world. So for me, there is very, very limited opportunity to get a club with a ready-made fan base in a one-club city, such as Newcastle United, with any other team in the Premier League that isn't going to cost them 2.5-3 billion. So when you look at PIF hanging around, not saying nothing, I don't think they ever will. I think principle says they do nothing till the deal is done. It's signed on the dotted line, the ink is dry, and it can be fully announced. So I firmly don't think we'll see anything. I still firmly believe that their interest is only investing in the Premier League because it's a league that is shown in every country across the world. It's also a money maker. I think as much as some people have said, early days with regards to PIF that, it'll be very much quietly. Amanda will be the front of the group, this, that, and the other. I think as this progresses with the timeline we've had, I think that narrative will change. And I think they'll go big bang if they do get hold of Newcastle, because I think they will want to make a statement to the Premier League and to other clubs. It will be my opinion. And, look, again, I'm not in the know. It's just, my gut feel. So I think they will hang around for as long as it takes. Certainly, kind of little discussions I've had offside with our lead and the guys that we do know from Saudi. I think, Pete, to take your point, they are a very, very proud nation and a proud people. And I think, I'm sure that what's going on with the Premier League is not floating their boat as such. But again, look at the deals that this wealth fund has done. Some of the massive, biggest companies and brands in the world. So for me, I think they want to be in the Premier League. I think they've got a ready-made club and a ready-made fan base that they know they will get massive, massive return on in spades. And I think that for those reasons alone, I think they'll stick around until it's needed.
I think the one thing I'll add before George answers that is the fact that Mike Ashley, we all know he's a penny pincher. He hates spending money, full stop. I still believe that the PIF are at the table because he wouldn't be spending millions of, well, we're presuming millions of pounds on these court cases if they weren't there. Because it's that's probably the simplest way I can put it. I don't think PIF are actually going to turn around and be the face of it. We've always seemed to have known that Amanda Staley's going to be the face of the consortium. It's always been like that from the start, and I agree with what both Pete and Martin have said. PIF, as they have with every other deal, they will be in the background. But it could be when it gets that close, that time of getting over the line, I do think PIF will make a big stand. And I think Daz has mentioned it a few times. They want to come through the front door, riding that horse into the middle of the pitch and say, look, we are here now, once it's been approved. But I firmly believe that Mike Ashley wouldn't be spending all the money he is now if they weren't at the table, especially with being an 80% backer, in my opinion.
The only thing I'll add to that is that is it actually Mike Ashley's money? And
probably not. I would imagine he's using some of the 17 million he got from the deposit. I think he is using the 17 million that he got as a deposit, and therefore that's money that he hasn't accounted for. So therefore, it's money that in one sense, isn't necessarily his. And he has used £17.50 of that though for a new pair of Sandicos for Jeff Hendrick that enabled him to get into the air to score a Shearer-esque header against Rotherham.
It's something to think about.
You need your main striker with a good pair of boots for next season. To be fair, old Jeff.
Well, he did more than Dwight Gale. So
George, what do you think with the Saudis? You think they're hanging around? Do you think 3 months time, no date set for arbitration? Do you think they just get pissed off and go, do you know what? Screw this. We don't need it.
No, in a word, I think we all know that their vision is to 2030. Now that's 9 years away. The organizations like this don't think in the short term. They think long-term, strategic. How do we get maximum return on investment? How do we turn $1 billion into $1 trillion? How do we turn $1 trillion into more than $1 trillion? because my brain can't comprehend those types of values. So I think for me, and it was interesting to listen to Amanda Staveley when she was on the television. She made a comment that originally I thought was a little bit offhand, but then, as always, you sort of start digging into it. And she mentioned something about the Saudis or she mentioned something about additional investment in media. Now, when you think about that, and you think about all of the work that the Saudis have done about reducing piracy and those rights, and the fact that there's an opportunity there for them to own a Premier League club and then have broadcasting rights in their area as well. So again, not in the short term, but longer term. And that, and again, is another revenue stream for them. So for me, I think the silence from them is to be expected. Pete, I think you're absolutely spot on in terms of when they made that statement. It was a joint statement. They were named in it, and I think that's the only time they've been in that. But I think that resonates exactly with what Ben said in terms of they've got their out already. So there's no embarrassment from them because they walked away, even though we've heard that they haven't, even though there's an arbitration case ongoing. So I think that's, for me, that's why that if that arbitration goes, that's why we're really knackered. I think it's the PCP or the sort of front leader of the consortium, and that was the way I understood the setup. That's how the organisation would be structured. So obviously it makes sense that Amanda's the sort of voice of it, if you like. And if you think about it logically as well, she's got the most to lose because she hasn't got a $1 trillion wealth fund to fall back on. She hasn't got £12 billion in the bank like the Reuben brothers have. Her net worth isn't on the same level. It's more than any of us could imagine, unless you're all secret millionaires. But she can't compete. So I think until such a time when that arbitration is pulled, they're there, because Mike's not going to incur the costs, and we know he's a gambler. We know that it's not his money. He could see it as an investment. £17 million well spent. But there comes a point where it's just not worth it anymore. And I think for me, the arbitration is the lesser for Mike. So if you think about the financial, well, the arbitration's on separation, and separation is about whether or not a takeover goes through. So the quickest pathway to the takeover. 4 out of the 5 asks on the CAT are about financial recompense, and some of them are speculative, and part of what they won of the club, well, not the club, St James's Holding, because they're material different arguments. What St James's Holding won in that was that they didn't have to disclose the annex, which was the calculations that Mike had given. So again, speculating, he's done whatever to his wealth during the period of the pandemic, which if he'd had an extra 300 million, he would have been able to demonstrate he's done the same. And the Premier League obviously wanted to scrutinise that calculation to try and pull it apart. But the judge said no, because there's commercially sensitive information in there. And I think that's going back to the transparency, confidentiality of the whole processes. You've got arbitration on the one side, which is completely behind closed doors, legacy issues in the Premier League handbook, which is forced upon new entries in the league. So the narrative around, and it's Simon Jordan's narrative, and like him or loathe him, he makes some good points sometimes, but the narrative that he had around the Newcastle trying to get the other 13 clubs to change their arbitration is just wrong. You can't vote for arbitration to be wholesale public, because that's not in line with the Arbitration Act. Arbitration is about coming together to discuss commercially sensitive issues and reach a resolution. And if you've got commercially sensitive issues, they can't just automatically be in the public. So it's an absolute nonsense to have that narrative and then think that Newcastle fans are stupid enough to fall for it. And I think we get drawn into those types of arguments sometimes, which are unnecessary. You just let them talk and get their clickbait hooks.
Okay. The question there then, I think you know this guy. Could the Premier League be arguing that because MBS is the chairman of PIF, he's got the direct links to BLQ, but if there isn't an argument, but if they are, isn't that argument irrelevant? As supposedly it's not about the piracy, it's about separation.
They're one and the same. So,
because
exactly the same argument.
Yeah.
So I think for me, sorry, Martin, for cutting across you there.
No, go on, mate. Go on.
I think MBS is the chair of PIF. We know that. It literally says it in their rules, and I think I mentioned it a while ago.
We mentioned it before.
That everybody knows that, and that's why I think the club were confident that they could demonstrate through whatever legal documents they had. But then as perspective changes and you think it's layers of separation, that you can sort of you can put that out even more, because he's at the top of the chain, and then on a day-to-day operational level, it's going to be Amanda Staveley, and she's going to be the one running the club, or at least that's what the documentation said.
Yeah.
But by having the piracy issue, if you fail to prove separation, then piracy is a crime, first and foremost, and that's you out of the owners and directors test straight away. There's also the fact that there's the loss of income from the Premier League, and not just the Premier League, the clubs themselves, because the clubs all share in that revenue. So ultimately, it's a double-edged sword.
Okay, you still there?
Yeah. Sorry,
no worries. Yeah, no, I think. I think there's a chunk of it for me. Like the piracy thing, I think has never really gone away, and I know Ben has kind of held that narrative. The couple of times he's been on the show to say, yes, it's about the separation, which is the main core piece, but the piracy thing is still there. It is still an issue, despite some of the moves that have been made. Because at the end of the day, if that separation is not proven, the Premier League will ask. Now, I suppose there's an argument there to say, and again, I don't know, but if I was somebody looking at it and wishing, I'm kind of going, well, okay, are the Premier League pushing to try and prove there's no separation so that they can hang the piracy piece on it to then, block it, make the rejection, not enable, MBS to go through? The other side obviously is that, part of the question as that supposedly has surfaced is that they wanted, the head of state of KSA to be named as the shadow director. So again, that then sends the O&D test down a different rail. So I don't know, is there a chunk of it that kind of like that's the caveat that the Premier League are trying to hang it out on? Or what that to me seems to be the Premier League's only real argument, for want of a better word, unless I'm reading things wrong, maybe.
It feels like, and I think it comes back down to, and I've seen Kirk sort of flash up a couple of times, the owners and directors test themselves. So there's a specific test that in theory, if we hadn't supplied sufficient information, that they should have failed. And that would have been the end of it, and we could have appealed the failure. We never even got that stage because we couldn't agree who to test. So from going back to what I said about separation and the arguments being around separation, you can't have that argument that they should have failed it without bringing the process in, which you can only get through the CAT. But the piracy issue is an interesting one because I think it's given the Premier League the opportunity to have that argument and even ask for. So Ben mentioned that they'd ask for disclosure in terms of PIF's relationship with either BOutQ or the broadcaster, and that's really critical for me in terms of that failure of the test, because if PIF and BOutQ are linked, then, well, the media director is on PIF's board. Yasser Al-Rumanin is, as is MBS. So you've got three people who are technically involved, who are potentially going to be involved in some way, shape, or form with the club as well. So there's a lot there that sort of brings it together.
Okay. We will. Where are we at? We're at an hour, so we won't keep people too much longer. So what? Go on.
Well, I was going to ask one question actually, because I don't know if it's ever been mentioned on Twitter. Because it's so hard to keep up to date sometimes. And
okay, let's do the sponsors and what's on next first, and then you can ask your question to finish up.
And then
we can add to it. Okay, yeah. So obviously sponsors. We do want to give a massive thanks, as we always do. Good man, Richie, you're on the buttons. I was scrolling. Centre Rail, the guys in Centre Rail, couldn't find it. The guys in Centre Rail, Bruce in, the only Bruce we do like, out in Centre Rail in Newcastle Central Station, purveyors of fine IPAs, ales, craft beers, distilled gins, Lindisfarne meads, and other things. Out there in Centre Rail, get out there, get yourselves a few bits and pieces. Tell Bruce the boys from Loaded sent you, and they will look after you for your cans. In particular, as and when the sunny, warm weather does come back. But yeah, thanks to their continued support. Tomorrow night we have got. Okay, see Richie, you're like eager. You're overshooting now. Like
I'm just going like how you normally actually say things. That's all. You're just going okay as that usual.
No, that's good. Do you want to go back the other way then? Do you want to do like and subscribe? So yeah, obviously, listen. It's great having people like George on. We've had a good few shows this week. We'll tell you what's coming up tomorrow night as well. But if you like what we do, me, Pete, Richie, Chris, and Daz, we're starting to get a few followers now. Go to the channel, hit the like, share, and if you'd be so kind, subscribe and let people know what we're doing. We don't make anything from it at all. We're trying to grow, but we're trying to give you, the lowdown as best we can without a lot of the technical jargon and everything else, by bringing the likes of George on and Ben and other people that we've got coming up in future weeks. So yeah, like and subscribe and share the word on Loaded Mag and Loaded HQ if you would. Coming up tomorrow night, we have robbed two of the amigos from NUFC Matters. So we've loaned them out for the evening. So Geordie Dentist and Old Heatonian. So Mitch and Steve Hasty will be on with us tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. I'm sure there will be some takeover talk. I'm sure the Geordie Dentist will give us a little bit of a lowdown if he's hearing anything over in the Middle East. And I'm sure we'll get Steve's unique perspective on all things Newcastle, where we currently stand. So probably a bit more chat tomorrow evening on the club, where we're going to go this season, how are we going to get on, and transfers and everything else. So join us tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. Daz and the guys. I may drop on. I may not be there. I may be away, but if I can drop on, I will. But join the guys tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Richie, question. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's something that I haven't seen much discussed on Twitter, and it might come across as a really stupid question. But
do you want me to ask it?
You don't even know what the question is, do you? No, George. I was just wondering, is there a particular reason why we haven't taken this to CAS rather than going through the Premier League arbitration and then do the separate case through CAT? Obviously, CAS is the highest sports court in the world. Why have we not gone there where it could have sped up, a decision, a positive one or a negative one? Has that been an option, or has it something to ever been discussed that you think may have happened, or what's your thoughts on that, George?
So I think it comes back down to the contract, the Premier League handbook, in that arbitration's dealt with in-house. And you're absolutely spot on. Again, the Court of Arbitration of Sport is the sort of highest court in the land. And I don't think that process could be started until arbitration had ended or a decision had been made. But with any sort of determination or I'm not 100% sure actually now, because arbitration is effectively trying to come to a consensus, isn't it? Sorry, I'm remembering rules now as the problem we had. So arbitration would have a decision because each of the three members has a vote, and you can't ever tie it. So there would be a determination and an outcome. So you'd have to appeal that, but again, you'd have to appeal it on legal grounds. And I think that's the only way you could then take it on to the Court of Arbitration of Sport. The CAT, a different ballgame, because you're not arbitrating a sort of an issue. You are dealing specifically with some of the anti-competitive behaviour that's been talked about and alleged. So I think that's the key critical difference. I mean, I could be wrong. I haven't necessarily looked at the Court of Arbitration Sport in any kind of detail, but it's just in my head, the sequence would be you conclude the arbitration within the contractual terms before you then seek reparation elsewhere. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else, boys? We're at an hour and a bit there now, so we will wrap up if we've kind of gone through it. We've had a load of questions. We didn't get through everybody's, but I think it's one of those, if we drag to an hour and a half and an hour and 40, we start to piss people off. So we've kind of learned our lessons from Loaded Football. That we don't drag on, because we started an hour and ended up doing Loaded Football for 3 hours on Wednesdays. So yeah, we like to talk, but it's good. It is good to get you on, George. So we are obviously hugely appreciative again that your missus allowed you to come out. So thanks to Mrs. Geordie 2302. Hey. But yeah, look, I'm sure we'll get you on again. As you said, it'll probably go quiet for a while now. But if anything does change or the narrative changes, I'm sure we'll reach out to you and get you back on, because good few watching tonight on the comments. So people like seeing you on here. So we'll make it a regular thing, hopefully, as we move forward. Richie, Pete, anything from you lads?
No, I just want to say thanks again for George coming on the show. We always appreciate his thoughts, and the fact we've had a lot of live viewers tonight who've been dying to ask questions. Well, unfortunately, we can't get to all of them. But obviously we'll try and get a variation there for George. But once again, George, thank you very much for coming on the show. Pete, you?
Yeah, the same. Really appreciate it. Obviously, I missed the Ben show, so it was good to kind of get a different angle and a different perspective on what's happening and what's likely to happen. And we can only really guess on it, but it's been some comments in there. This particular comment was the comment of the night for me. PCP was angel dust in the 80s movie. Trading Places is one of my favorite films of all time. So when I saw this, I was like, this is legendary. So MD, absolutely quality. Comment of the night for me, legend. And I'm actually going to stick that film on now just because you put that comment on. So spot on.
Okay. That is it then, folks. So we will wrap up. George, again, thanks very much for coming on. From me, Richie, and Pete, we would like to say thanks very much for watching. Join us again tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, where we've got Mitch and Steve Hasty on, and we will see you all soon. Thanks very much. Talk
Good
to you
night,
soon.
everyone.
Good night, everybody.